So I will now introduce our speaker for tonight. So we have Jon Axline with us. He's the historian for the Montana Department of Transportation, and he's done research into Montana roads, bridges, trails, highways, and many other things, including UFOs. So we're really lucky to have Jon with us here today, and I will pass it over to him. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Y'all hear me okay? Because I can't tell from up here whether I'm going to talk about a subject tonight that's controversial, as you can imagine. I'm a skeptic. I'm not really convinced there's such a thing as extraterrestrial such a thing as flying saucers, but I've been interested in the subject for a long time. In fact, since 1967, when my parents, bless their souls, bought me the magazine on the left there. And I totally did not solicit it. I didn't ask for it. They just came back from the grocery store with it, and I've been hooked ever since. In 1968, the comic book came out and scared the living hell out of me because, you know, they have all these occupant stories, and every time I go out to my grandparents' house, I expected some kind of visitation at night. And so, but anyway, I've been interested in this subject since 1967. But since I became a historian, I've been more interested in the historic context of UFOs rather than the sensational parts about it. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about tonight. I don't want to get involved in the conspiracy theories or the cover-ups or debunking witnesses or whatever. I just want to tell you a straight story about what happened to Nick Mariana in August 1950. And what happened afterwards is kind of interesting as well. So again, I am a skeptic, and I've never seen one. And I've wanted to, but it's never happened, and I'm not really in a big hurry to see one anyway, because then you have to talk about it, and yeah, then the trouble starts. So anyway, what I'm going to talk about, what I'm interested in this as well, is I like the early period of the UFO era, flying saucer era, because that ties in very closely with the Cold War. And the way people were feeling about things in general seems to have manifested itself often in their sightings of flying saucers, that there was a lot of tension in the air. I mean, what are they? I know they were seeing something that was just, they didn't know what it was they were seeing. And that's where the real interest in all this for me comes. So when someone says I saw a flying saucer, they did. It's just that we don't know what it was, unless it could be explained at some point. So I'll say right off the bat, I mean, 80% of the sightings are explainable as natural phenomenon or as airplanes or balloons or whatever, and 20% still remain as being unexplained, that they don't know what it is. So, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So anyway, with that, I'll start off. The flying saucer era began on June 24th, 1947, when a Boise salesman and a private pilot was flying towards Mount Rainier in his little two-seater airplane, and he saw 9 crescent-shaped objects flying in formation near Mount Rainier. And so he didn't have an explanation for it. His name was Kenneth Arnold. He was a firm believer that what he saw was something explainable, that it was either airplane or secret airplanes or whatever. He never did think that they were extraterrestrial until later in his life, and he became a hardcore, I don't know what you call him, extraterrestrialist. So, but what's interesting about this is that it did make the news. When he landed, he did talk to reporters about it, and the story kind of spread like wildfire. And so within a short time, they were known as flying saucers because of the way that Arnold described that they were kind of skipping along. And so no one knows for sure who coined that term, but that became the popular designation for them in June 1947. So what happened afterwards was it ignited a national craze, a mania, that everybody was seeing flying saucers. So just from June of 1947 to December of that year, there was 800 reported UFO sightings, especially in July. And I think it's very interesting that it was all during the 4th of July weekend. So that might have had something to do with it, but I can't say for sure. But in Helena, in Montana, there was officially only 2 reported. But if you read the newspapers at the time, it seemed like everybody and their brothers were seeing flying saucers in Montana. That the stories appeared in the newspapers. They were seeing everything from flying discs to fiery orbs to flaming grocery bags to yo-yos, anything that their imagination ran wild with them. And so most of them were, a lot of them I guess were really, there was more than one included in the sighting, but most of them were one saucer or one object, we'll say that. In Helena there was a lady that saw one here, and she was sunbathing in her backyard, and she saw it and she watched it for 45 minutes, and so did her neighbors. And then she thought they might have been milkweed seeds. So, because that was one of the theories, they're milkweed seeds. They could be fireflies. Well, you know, I've never seen a firefly in Montana, but all kinds of theories came forward as to what they were. They never came through with the idea that they may be extraterrestrial in origin until later. That wasn't part of the initial sighting mania that occurred. There was some speculation about little green men and all that, but it was not, well, none of it was very serious. And so if you were in a town that didn't get a flying saucer sighting, that made the news even. So people in Whitetail, Montana were upset. Well, we haven't seen one here yet. You know, so anyway, it's just kind of interesting. And again, I think a lot of it's a manifestation of the tensions of the Cold War, that they were nervous. This was just before the Soviets exploded their own atomic bomb. And so people generally were just kind of nervous about what was going on. Part of the issue with flying saucers as well was it indicated to a lot of Americans that we weren't, the military wasn't in control of the skies over the country, and that was contributing to that tension as well. So, but it is very interesting. The government was kind of, or the military was interested in it, but they were interested primarily in whether they were a threat to national security. So in 1948, they opened up, well, here's a few of the first UFO sighting in Montana that's reported was at the Craig Bridge south of Cascade, where over the 4th of July weekend, a man and his wife saw 12 of them and flying towards the northwest. And so it's fun. I mean, I don't know what else to say. So it's, pardon?
Their addresses in there.
Yeah, it's funny though that the wives usually didn't have first names either. It was always Mrs. So-and-so, you know, or, so I kind of feel bad for them that way.
Where was this?
1947. Yeah, this was during the initial mania phase in July of 1947. So just some other ideas, other things. I like the one the Helena woman sees flying saucer. It was no dream, but was as real as the southern moon. And she was at the intersection of Rodney Street and 6th when she looked up and saw it flying towards the north, and it was as big as half a block, she said. But she was the only one that saw it, which I always think is kind of interesting as well. But she ended the interview with the fact that Truman or anybody else could tell her they don't exist. I saw one. And what happened just weeks before her sighting was that Harry Truman had said, you know, I don't know if there's really anything to it or not. So she was responding to his comments. So 1948, 1949, the Air Force did initiate a couple of projects to investigate the phenomenon. The first one was called Project Sign, and the second one was Project Grudge. What they were doing primarily was just collecting reports and trying to ascertain from those reports what exactly these things were. Mostly, they concluded in both projects that there was nothing to it, and these weren't a threat to the national security. But when all this was going on, there was a wave of sightings, and that was, when you get, the more of them you get, the more overwhelmed the government or the Air Force was. I hate to keep saying government because that kind of does sound conspiratorial, but anyway. In 1950, there was another wave of sightings in the United States, and there was a fair number of them here in Montana. The flying cigar that cut its trail through Montana was actually first spotted in Spokane at the air base there, and then it was seen at Missoula, then through Butte, Whitehall, then Helena, Canyon Ferry, and ended up in Great Falls. And it was reported by a number of different people. They couldn't agree on exactly what it looked like. They all pretty much said it looked like a flying banana. And but they were tracking this thing across 3 states. And finally, at the end, it disappeared towards the east over Lewistown. And of course, the Lewistown News Argus was upset because, well, we never saw it. It never got this far. There must be something wrong with Lewistown. And so, but anyway, but in August 1950, things kind of got a little interesting. And this man here is Nicholas Mariana. He was born in Miles City, graduated from U of M. He was a big-time sports nut, I guess you could say. He was involved heavily in sports around Montana, not so much as a player, as a participant, but mostly as in reporting them. He was also a coach. He had a weekly news program, a syndicated news program on Montana radio stations called Nick's Picks. And so he was really a fairly well-known individual here in Montana by August of 1950. So in 1948, he went to work for the Great Falls Baseball Club as their general manager. It was called the Selectrics, the team. It wasn't affiliated with any major league teams. It was kind of an independent. Selectrics, where do you think they got that name for it? Pardon? The Electric City, and what else?
Great Falls Select.
Great Falls Select, exactly. So that name only lasted a short time before they dropped the S and they became the Electrics. But they did play at Legion Ballpark, and that ballpark is still there at the corner of River Drive and North 25th Street in Great Falls, so you can go see there. If you ever stop there, one thing that's important to this whole story is the General Mills elevator complex that's right next to the ballpark. And just from my MDT background, it also has one of the nicest reinforced concrete arch bridges right there as well. So, but that's neither here nor there. But Mariana was a pretty well-known individual. I guess you'd call him a local celebrity. At about 11:30 in the morning, let me go on to the next one here. This is his secretary, Virginia Raunig. She was from Chester. She was 19 years old in 1950, and she was Mariana's secretary. And she's kind of a looker, I think, looking back. And she was worked around, had a number of different jobs in the Great Falls area before she got married and moved up to Inverness, and it's where she passed away in 2021, I believe. So, but she was working in the office, and Mariana was climbing the stairs of the Legion Ballpark grandstands looking for the groundskeeper. The story he says is that he looked off towards the north, towards the Anaconda Company refinery, because he said he always did that because he liked to see which way the wind was blowing from the smokestack. And so as he looked that direction, there's the water tower in the background there, just as a reference. So when he looked towards the north, towards the refinery, he saw a flash, and looked up, and there was two shiny objects that were hovering over the refinery and spinning. And he says you could tell they were spinning because there was a little notch on them and you could see them moving around. He said there was also variable light. They were generating their own light during this whole thing. And so when he saw that, he said, oh geez, these are flying saucers. These aren't airplanes. So he took off for his car in the parking lot because he just happened to have a brand new movie camera in the glove compartment. So he got the camera, loaded it up with film, and then he supposedly filmed about 30 seconds of these two saucers, or whatever they were, as they hovered over the refinery, and then they started to move towards the south. And it's the part where they're moving towards the south that we get the video, which hopefully will work. And I don't think it's going to. Well, poop. Well, this is it. This is all he really saw. I'm sorry, I had the whole thing on here and it didn't load up correctly, but I think this will work just fine. This is what he saw. What he saw was they were moving behind, they're flying off towards the south. There was a couple of F-94 Starfire fighter jets behind him in Virginia, and so they stood out in the parking lot and they watched these things. And he filmed them with his movie camera, and it was the first time that flying saucers were caught on motion picture film. And that's when all the fun started for Mariana. He knew what it was he saw, and he was firmly believed that they were flying saucers. Again, he didn't know what they were exactly. They were airplanes or whatever, but he was pretty sure they weren't fighter jets because they were behind him when he did all the filming. So what the Air Force had tried to do was to tell him, no, you were just, filming fighter jets. And he kept saying, no, they were in a different part of the sky from where this was occurring. So with the film, if you watch it, God, you can see it on YouTube. Just type in Mariana UFO film or Montana movie and you can watch it on YouTube. It's not very long, only a few seconds long, but that few seconds has generated a controversy that's lasted for the past 75 years. I mean, what was on that film? So if you look at the water tower at Legion Ballpark, what was the best part about the whole film is you saw them fly behind that water tower. They went behind it and came out the other way. So that was a big reference for the investigators and the analysts of the film later on that made them think that this probably, what was this? They didn't know either. Well, I just jumped back. Is this right? I think it took me back to the beginning. I'm not a tech person. I'm too old to be a tech person. Oh. Okay, did I hit the wrong one? Yeah, I don't know if that was supposed to. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, because we hit the button. It should have played.
Yeah.
So.
I'm going to give it one more try.
You want to bring it back? Yep, it's going right past it now. There it is. Yeah, there should be a little arrow or something in the middle of the screen. Well, maybe that'll work. So, okay. Well, anyway, I'm sorry it didn't work because it is kind of interesting to watch. And it was one of those things when I first saw this when I was a kid, it was a little bit scary. I was impressionable then. Okay, so this is a general map that was done in 1967 about the path of the UFOs and the perspective that Mariana had of them. You can see that dashed line over by the airport is the flight path of the saucers, and so that's. And then this is just an aerial view. You can see I think you can see the ballpark. I'm just not doing very well. Does she? Okay. It's right, there's the ballpark right there. And then the General Mills complex down towards the southern part of the thing. So you can kind of get an idea of where all this took place. When Mariana took the film, he sent it off to Chicago to Eastman Kodak to be processed and got it back within a short time, and then he started showing it to different organizations and individuals around Great Falls. He did have a meeting with the Great Falls leader and also with the Great Falls Tribune. The leader was the one that really kind of took this story and ran with it. The Tribune never even mentioned it happened. And I think usually, or what I've seen is the leader was a lot more sympathetic to the people who saw these things. The Tribune just kind of poo-pooed them and didn't give them much newspaper space, at least at the beginning. So when he showed them to a sports roundtable group, he showed them to other civic organizations, and anybody who wanted to see the thing, he would show it to them. So he was obviously very interested in getting that story out, and you can see that there was plenty in the newspaper about it. Eventually, at one of the meetings, one of the Great Falls leader reporters approached him and said, you know, you really ought to call the Air Force and have them take a look at this and see if maybe they can tell what it was. And so Mariana did call the Air Force. They did come send an intelligence officer to his place of business, and he did loan them the film. And then it kind of got lost for a little bit, and Nick became a little worried about what had happened to it, and finally contacted the Great Falls Air Base to see if they could check on it. And what it turns out was the Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, which was the group that was analyzing the film, said they never got it. And Mariana said, well, wait a minute. I personally gave it to the intelligence officer who had written something, a report that says, yes, I received this 8 feet of film from Nick Mariana on such and such a date. And all of a sudden the Air Force says, oh yeah, we did get it. It was too dark, we couldn't see anything. But what we definitely know, it wasn't isotropic luminous reflectors. Any idea what that is? Weather balloons. A weather balloon. We don't know what it is, we can't see it, but it's not a weather balloon, whatever it was. And so, but when Mariana got the film back, there was a good chunk of it was missing. And the part that showed the objects hovering over the Great Falls refinery was not with the film anymore. But there were individuals in Great Falls who remember seeing the whole thing and said they do remember that part. And it was the best part of the film because it showed them in detail. And the part that you see now, you know, that we see on the film now is really kind of the less important of it. So the Air Force denied, of course, that they ever got it. And this is where the kind of the cover-up part of the story begins that I'll talk a little bit about here in a minute. So that was kind of the end of it for a while. There wasn't much mention of it until 1953. The CIA conducted an investigative panel called the Robertson Panel to investigate UFO sightings, and they concentrated on the ones that they didn't have an answer for, that they were unknowns, that there wasn't any rational explanation for what they were. And so the Robertson Panel met, and Project Blue Book was a part of that. I think we've all probably heard about that. They watched the 16-second video. They didn't have access to the part that was supposedly missing, which was about 2 feet of film. And but here, let me get my notes up. So, but they did conclude through the Robertson Panel that no, we don't know what's on it. It's an unknown. It's not birds, it's not airplanes, it's not balloons, because they would have been flying against the wind because it was coming out of the southwest and they were flying towards the south. And they said it couldn't be birds because you'd see them flapping in the analysis. So they knew that it wasn't that. They were pretty good at saying, well, this is what they aren't, but they weren't very good about saying what they thought they were. And so they kind of left it hanging for a while. So Mariana did get his film back from the Robertson panel after he loaned it to them. And the Robertson, the film was duplicated by the Air Force at that time, so that there was copies of the film that were in circulation, at least within the military, so that they would have a copy of it, not have to borrow it from them anymore. And my question now is, what happened to the original? The duplicates are in the Library of Congress, but I don't know what happened to the original. And I don't know whatever exactly happened to that missing 2 feet of footage. So a friend of mine suggested maybe you ought to do a Freedom of Information Act request. And I said, I don't even know how you would describe it to them, what to look for. So I'm still mulling over doing that. I think that's probably a lost cause. But when Mariana got his film back, it turns out that there was a Hollywood producer that was a big fan of flying saucers. And he'd heard about this film from the Robertson panel. And so they funded the production of a movie called Unidentified Flying Objects. And this is one of the lobby cards from it. That's Mariana in the upper left-hand corner of the lobby card, and then this is what his interview looked like in the film. It's not a very good movie, and it never shows up on TV. It was kind of filmed as a documentary, but you know, it was one of those documentaries that it makes you question it right from the very beginning on how it was done. Not quite sensational, but except for the film, it's really not very interesting either. But Nick Mariana does an interview on camera about that day and what he saw. He's very extroverted, very outgoing about it. He's very sure that by now he thinks they were extraterrestrial in origin. And so the film does get shown. And what happens is that's the first time the Montana movie gets nationwide exposure. Before that, it's mostly, you know, with the Air Force, or everybody around the Great Falls area knows about it, but it's not got a whole lot of publicity nationwide. I love these things. This refers back to an incident that happened in, I believe, January 1948, when a National Guard pilot from Kentucky supposedly chased a UFO, and eventually his airplane crashed. And so, as you can imagine what happened after that, you know, of course the flying saucer shot it down and the whole works. But in any case, it's not a good movie. I think you can probably watch it on YouTube. I've got it on VHS tape, so you know how much, you know, circulation it got. But that wasn't the end of the story. I mean, it just kind of keeps going on and on with Nick Mariana and his Montana movie. In January 1950, True Magazine published an article called "The Flying Saucers Are Real." It was written by Major Don Kehoe, who's the guy there on the left. That he was the guy that escorted Lindbergh around his nationwide tour after the flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1928. He had become a pulp writer. He also did some freelance writing for the magazines. The publisher, or the editor of True Magazine, contacted him and asked him if he would like to do an article about flying saucers. But the editor's name was Ken Purdy, had already had a preconceived notion of what they were, or what it was. And so he pretty much told Kehoe, this is how you're going to approach this project. And so when Kehoe started his 8-month investigation into flying saucers in 1949, that he had a preconceived notion of what the whole thing was. And so, you know, that's fine, but if you read the article, I mean, he's got certain things in it that he says this is what they are, and those things are provided the basis of how we look at UFOs today, and still is how we look at them. One of them was that they were from outer space. There's no question about it. He says they've been observing Earth for a long time, at least 175 years, and for some reason he doesn't really quite understand that there's a sudden flurry of sightings around the United States and the world, in fact, after 1947. And he also says, pretty much, the government knows they're real. And they're covering it up because they don't want us to know the truth. And this particular article in True Magazine was sensational. They sold out. They had to reprint that issue. And it turns out it was the most popular article that appeared in True Magazine up until the time it went out of business in 1974. So it was a big deal. But Kehoe kind of became the spokesman for the government cover-up people, and also became pretty loud about his belief that they were from outer space. It was so popular, he expanded the article later in 1950 and published this book called The Flying Saucers Are Real. It was only published in paperback for a quarter, but again, it sold 900,000 copies of the paperback. So there was a lot of those things floating around, and I finally found one on the internet, and it cost $25, which was, I had a hard time explaining that to my wife, you know, when we did that book. But it's kind of a fun book to read, but you have to read it kind of with the mind that he's already knows what they are for sure, and he's the biggest proponent of it. After the Robertson panel studied the Mariana film, and after it appeared in that UFO movie, it kind of languished for a while. You didn't really hear much about it until 1966. And that year, the Air Force, again, were getting kind of tired of flying saucers. They wanted to end the whole controversy once and for all, because they were getting the blame for, you know, you're covering it up, you're debunking the witnesses, and so, you know, we need to take care of this. And so they formed a panel through the University of Colorado. It consisted of 20 scientists, including the chairman, a man named Edward Condon, who was a pretty well-known scientist in the United States at that time. And they studied around 91 cases that had occurred mostly within recent years in the 1960s. And this all kind of started because there was a wave of sightings in 1966, and one of the members, the scientific advisor to Project Blue Book, a man named J. Allen Hynek, had postulated that they might have seen swamp gas, and everybody, you know, ridiculed that idea. And so, but there was other things going on too that year. I don't know if any of you have heard of Mothman. Somebody's heard of Mothman. The first documented Mothman sighting was in 1966, and so there was a lot going on that year. So really, the Condon Committee was kind of like the opposite of Don Kehoe's book, The Flying Saucers Are Real. They were out to disprove them. So they studied these 91 cases. 40 of them were older cases, and some of them were ones that had not been properly explained, and one of those was the Mariana movie, the Montana movie, case number 47. And so to study that, they sent a man up back to Great Falls to interview witnesses. He talked to Virginia Ronig, who said she could only remember one light. She didn't remember seeing two, but she also made the comment that, well, you know, Nick kind of told me I had to go along with this because I'd lose my job if I didn't. And, you know, he was a promoter. That was his job for the most part. So it added a little bit of doubt, you know, to what it is he'd seen, and that maybe he'd fabricated the movie. And there's really no evidence that he ever did. I mean, I don't, it would be hard to fabricate something like that at the time. He did talk to the gentleman, or talked to gentlemen who had seen the entire film in 1950 before the Air Force took it for analysis, and said, oh yeah, you could see them a lot more clearly in the part that's missing. They went to Portland, Oregon to talk to Mariana, re-interview him, and amazingly, you know, for all the times he'd talked about this sighting before, he seemed to have lost track of some of the facts of it. So during this investigation by the Condon Committee, I mean, they couldn't even tell exactly what day this all happened because Mariana had a different idea. He said, I watched these things for 30 minutes and said, no, probably maybe about 30 seconds at most you saw them. But they did have some questions about the objects themselves. And they had a man named Dr. Robert Baker who was an astrophysicist and a mathematician, investigate it. He was also one of the early computer nerds at the time. And he decided too, I don't know what's on there. I mean, I can tell you what it isn't, but I can't tell you what it is. But he said, surprisingly, he says, when you watch the film itself, that if you watch those objects and you can measure the speed, that they are traveling at least 640 miles per hour when they disappeared. Now, this is, 1950, and we really didn't have any airplanes that went that fast. So that was a big mystery for Dr. Baker as well. And so they did a lot of analysis of it. They did a lot of study. They did a lot of questioning. And they concluded at the end of it, we don't know what's on there. I mean, but one of the investigators said, of all the sightings that I've investigated, that this is the one sighting that makes me think there's a UFO problem. And so that was a pretty big conclusion from a committee that was hell-bent on disproving flying saucers and not proving their existence. So after that, you'd see the film on television occasionally. It was usually in, documentaries appeared on TV that were sensational, that weren't very reliable for information or the truth even. But at least, that film got out more and more so that the Montana movie really became pretty famous in UFO circles. And so what happened with that was all kinds of stories came out about a conspiracy. One of the stories was that a gentleman was visiting Mariana in his house in Missoula. He moved to Missoula in 1953, and he had a beer distributorship, and also was on the radio. Nick's Picks was still on the radio then, and so according to this unnamed source, that a couple of Air Force officers showed up at his door when this guy just happened to be there, and this man eavesdropped on the conversation between the three of them, and said, well, they offered him $10,000 to shut up, to deny the film. They offered him a federal job, and they promised to relocate him, and the whole works. I mean, it was classic UFO cover-up right from the beginning. The only difference was these weren't men in black that visited him. It was a couple of Air Force officers. So, and supposedly, Mariana took the buyout, but he never shut up about it. I mean, he talked about it till the end of his life. He died in 1999 in Portland, Oregon, and so to the very end, he knew what was on that film, even if nobody else believed him. And so. It's kind of funny too, at the end of his life, he and his wife, I don't remember her name offhand, became commercial actors in Portland, and they advertised all kinds of things, mortuaries, cars, and it was all directed towards senior citizens in Portland. And so they were quite the celebrity on TV at that time as well. So, but I don't know. I'm going to leave it up to you guys. I don't really know what's on it. Nobody seems to really know what's on there. I'd like to find the original film strip, because I think at this point in 2025 that they could remaster it and digitize it. Yeah, they might be able to see more on it than they could in 1950. So, but it's a big deal in Great Falls. Still, it's become part of Great Falls' history. Kind of interesting because it was so obscure for so long that all of a sudden the sighting became famous, and the Montana movie became famous as well. And so the baseball club team in Great Falls renamed themselves the Great Falls Voyagers. And they had a little green man with antenna was the mascot. And when they first formed, they made a big deal about that movie. That this was the whole reason why we renamed ourselves, and that was because of the Montana movie. It happened right here in our parking lot. That this is where it occurred. So again, I leave it up to you. I don't know what it is either. I think it's an interesting story, whether you believe it's flying saucers or not. I think it fits very nicely into that whole conspiracy cover-up mentality that occurred after Kehoe's article was published in 1950. And it's just really representative of the time that it occurred. But with the one difference is that what's ever shown on that film is still classified as an unknown. So, in the process, I built up a pretty good library of flying saucer books. My parents looked askance at that, and I remember when I was in high school, my mother was giving me a ride home from driver's ed, and I said, I think I want to be a UFOologist when I grow up. And that was the wrong thing to say to your mother when she's driving. I thought she was going to hit a lamppost for sure. And fortunately, at that time, I didn't know if I was kidding or not. So I like to think I was kidding at this point because I don't think there's any money in it, to tell you, and probably not very much credibility either. But so that's the story of Nick Mariana and the Montana movie. And so if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. I won't get involved in any conspiracy arguments, though. So, because I don't think there is one. Rich?
Okay, wait, before you ask questions, if you would please let me come to you with the microphone so we can make sure we capture it on the recording.
Just a related subject. Do you have any insights or opinions about crop circles?
No.
No?
The other thing I don't have a good opinion about, there's some wild stories going around about how UFOs shut down the missile fields. And I have talked to a few Air Force men who were at Malmstrom when that happened. They just laugh. That never happened. So, but I don't know. But so that, Helena was kind of the source of this too for a while. In 1976, there was a big rash of cattle mutilations in Lewis and Clark in Cascade County, and there was a kid that was my age that was going to Capitol, which that might tell you something. That I didn't say that though. I went to Helena High. Who woke up in the middle of the night and looked out his window in a second floor room towards the east, out by where the Bompart Road is, just off of Canyon Ferry Drive, and he saw a couple of big feet. Is that how the big feet in the field doing something? And they apparently saw him and started walking towards the house, and of course he panicked and woke his parents up, and they were all, that scared me too, 18 years old, and yeah, it kind of was scary. But a lot of that kind of stuff has happened around Montana. There's been a lot of UFO sightings in Montana. Somehow it got the reputation of being one of the hotbeds of flying saucers. I think that might be, people think that because of the missile fields. But, again, I looked all the time and I've never seen one. So any other? Yeah, if you can on there. Maybe we'll still get to see what it looks like. If you get into Google and do Montana film and Montana movie. So, yes, sir.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Yeah. Does Roswell 1947 factor into any of this at all? And how well known was Roswell sort of nationwide in the 50s when all this was sort of percolating.
Well, it doesn't really...
And there is a hell in the connection to Roswell, of course.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Jesse Marcel's father. Well, 1947 was kind of a big year. I mean, they had the first flying saucer sighting, modern flying saucer sighting. The U.S. Air Force was created by the National Security Act that year, and Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in 1947 as well. And Roswell happened. There doesn't seem to be a connection. I mean, there was an initial flurry of stuff in the newspaper about it, and then mostly by the end of the year, you didn't see anything at all about anything at Roswell. It seemed like whatever we know about Roswell incident today, or what we think we know, came about in the 1980s when there was somebody found the newspaper that says the Air Force had captured a flying saucer. All right. So I don't think it really factors into this. I'm not sure Mariana had ever heard about Roswell. I'm not sure a whole lot of people had. There was indications that some people had heard it because it was, the thing from another world and a movie called The Flying Saucer both dealt with crashed saucers. And so the answer, I guess, is no. I think pretty definitely the Air Force has proven that it was a top secret program called Project Mogul that was launched so they could tell whether the Soviets had exploded an atom bomb yet or not. So by collecting radioactivity from the atmosphere.
One of my colleagues, Dr. Jess Marcel,
Yes.
was born and raised in Roswell,
Yes.
and he saw the remnants of the supposed aircraft, whatever you want to call it. So to his mind, there was no question that it was something out of the ordinary. I guess that's the best way to word it.
I agree with that. I met him once, and the first thing he says was Roswell happened. But yeah, it did happen, but it may not have happened the way that we popularly think it did. So, because that story kind of took on a life of its own too. But first, it started out as we found pieces of a crashed saucer, and all of a sudden there was a second saucer and alien bodies with it. And then from there it went to we've captured some of we have live, these pilots are living in a secure Air Force base. And
Whatever happened to those parts?
I don't know. It sounded like, from what I read, was that the parts were pretty much what they made up the Project Mogul balloons and instrument packages out of. So I don't know what happened to it. There's also the story that the parts you see in the photograph with Major Marcel is not what he actually had seen originally. And so, but anyway, I don't know. I can't tell you for sure.
Well, he's a believer.
He was a believer. And, he has something at I don't know if the UFO research library that he had still exists or not. So, but.
It does.
Does it? Yeah, I kind of was thinking I should call Mrs. Marcel and see, because stupid John had a big library of flying saucer books that he collected over the years. And then at some point, stupid John thought, well, I'm never going to need these again. So he packed them up somewhere, and I have no idea where they're at now, which I think would have helped to have a little bit more broader context by looking at it. But a lot of the books that came out were, sure there was a government conspiracy and all that. And some of them used, awful terms that I can't stand, like humanoid and, discoid and things like that. It's just kind of like well, anyway. So, sir, you have a question?
Can we take let's take a little pause from questions and show the video if we can, and then we'll resume questions.
Remember, it's very short and it's very grainy.
show you the Montana film. This film was shot August the 15th, 1950. It was taken in Great Falls, Montana by Nick Mariana. Immediately after we were notified of the sighting, we sent an intelligence man to get a first-hand report.
How do I get out of that? There we go.
My name is Nick Mariana. For the past 6 years, I've been the general manager of a minor league baseball club called the Electrics. We play out of Great Falls, Montana, and are a farm club of the Brooklyn Dodgers.
His son, I believe, lives over in Bitterroot
at Legion Ballpark
get a
in
hold
Great
of
Falls,
him, but I
Montana.
haven't been
After a
successful.
couple of hours in the clubhouse office,
You want to see it again?
Show you the Montana film. This film was shot August the 15th, 1950.
All right. Sir, you had a question, too.
No, it was involving Area 51, the same thing.
Yeah. I don't have an opinion about that. And I mean, yes, sir. Oh.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, just a couple of comments. My name is Richard O'Connor. I worked with Dr. Marcel at St. Peter's Hospital for over a decade, and I had several conversations with him about Roswell. And, he told me to my face that his father brought this stuff home, said this was from a flying saucer, not from this earth. And his father was the chief intelligence officer for the 509th Bomb Wing, which was the only nuclear-armed military group in the world at that time. And he and I talked about this on numerous occasions. And I have absolute confidence in Dr. Marcel's integrity and his intelligence and his just inability to lie. So what you said is true. I mean, he and his father both may have been mistaken about the material. That's possible, but I don't think it's likely.
Yeah.
And so about 12 years ago, I opened the Jesse A. Marcel Library, which is outside of town here, in 11 Ponderosa Road. And I have a much different take on the conspiracy theory aspect of all of this. I believe there has been a conspiracy going on to cover this up for quite some time. And the truth about this is now starting to spill out. And for those of you who are just sort of getting maybe a little interested in this, I would recommend that you look for a film, a documentary film that's coming up here. It's going to be released in early March, about a month from now, at the South by Southwest Film Festival in Austin, Texas. And the title of that film is The Age of Disclosure. It premieres, I believe, on March the 14th at the Paramount Theater in Austin. But this film, the people in it are just impeccable as far as their credibility, their credentials, the posts that they have held within our government. James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence. David Grush, Chief Intelligence Officer who was involved in the UAP task force. Jay Stratton, who was one of the leaders of the UAP task force. And if you go home this evening and you look on YouTube and look for the trailer of this film called The Age of Disclosure, and watch the trailer. At the very end of that, you will hear Jay Stratton, who was associated with the UAP task force recently, say, "I have seen alien craft and I have seen alien bodies with my own eyes." You'll hear him say that. Not only that, but David Grush has testified under oath in front of Congress, in front of the House of Representatives Oversight Committee in July of 2023, that he was involved with a UFO recovery and reverse engineering program. So all of this is starting to spill out. Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, Marco Rubio, Martin Heinrich from New Mexico, and one other Mike Rounds from North Dakota. These are all senators who drafted and signed the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. I recommend that you go home, look up the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023 and read it. It mentions non-human intelligence 22 times. It has paragraphs in it talking about non-human technologies that have been recovered by our government. So there's a lot going on with this right now, and it really is worth your attention. And for my interest in it primarily is driven by one thing that you mentioned, Roger, and that is the link between UFOs and nuclear weapons, because those events happened in connection with Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967, March of 1967, and 10 nuclear missiles were rendered non-functional by a UFO. And that was reported by Captain Robert Salas, who was there on the site. And he was down in the launch capsule when he got a call from up above from the security guard telling him that there was a UFO hovering over that installation, and all 10 of those nuclear missiles went down right then. And I know Captain Salas. I've met him. I've talked with him about this face to face. There's another Captain David Shenley who was stationed in South Dakota. I've talked with him about his experience with UFOs shutting down those nuclear weapons. There's a book that everybody should read. It's called UFOs and Nukes. It's written by Robert Hastings. It was published about 10 years ago. In that book, he's interviewed over 100 missileers who were witnesses to these events that took place. So I don't want anybody to leave here thinking that this question's been answered, because it hasn't been. We're seeing right now the beginnings of our government starting to come clean with the citizens about what's been going on with these UFO, capturing UFOs and reverse engineering them. So anyway, that's all I want to say. If you have any other questions, or if you want to know anything about the library, please approach me. Thanks.
Are there any last questions for Jon before we close up?
All right, thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Jon, and we hope to see you at our future events, and I hope it's okay if I tell them that they can come ask you questions for a few minutes before we head out the door.